I work at a large retail store, one of those big-name supermarkets that are open late, and this happened to me just last month. I mostly work in the grocery section, stocking shelves and keeping the area organized. It's usually a pretty straightforward job, but what happened that night was anything but normal. It had been a busy evening at first, but as the hours crept by, the store gradually quieted down. Around 9:30 p.m., I had just finished stocking one of the aisles near the frozen foods and decided to take my break. The break room is located near the front of the store, so I grabbed my phone and started walking that way. As I got closer to the front, I noticed something unusual. There were police officers inside the store. At first, I thought maybe there had been a shoplifting incident or some kind of customer dispute, but it didn't seem chaotic. I had to pass near them to get to the break room, and as I did, I noticed there were 3 officers calmly speaking with one of our managers and a customer. The conversation wasn't loud or tense. In fact, it seemed oddly calm, which only made it feel weirder. I couldn't really catch what they were saying, so I just kept walking, figuring it wasn't my business. I went into the break room, sat down, and scrolled through my phone, trying not to overthink it. By the time my break ended, the police were gone. Everything seemed quiet again, and I assumed whatever had happened earlier had been handled. I headed back to the grocery aisles to finish stocking shelves. The store was nearly empty by then, quieter than usual. About 30 minutes after I'd gotten back to work, I was in one of the aisles toward the far end of the grocery section. It was the aisle with bags of rice, beans, and other dry goods. One of those quieter corners of the store where customers rarely linger late at night. I was crouched down, stocking the bottom shelf, which had the larger, heavy bags of rice stacked up. That particular shelf was a little taller and deeper than the others, with enough space behind the bags to easily conceal something or someone. As I grabbed another 20-pound bag of rice and bent down to place it on the shelf, I suddenly froze. My eyes locked onto a shadowy figure tucked behind the stacked bags. There, curled up in the dark space at the back of the shelf, was a man, hiding. He was staring right at me. For a second, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. I just stood there, gripping the bag of rice midair, completely still. His eyes never left mine. Slowly, he shifted, rolling out from behind the shelf and onto the floor. Then, in one quick motion, he stood up. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe a few inches shorter than me, and he had a thin frame with dark, messy hair. His face was pale, and his expression was unreadable. I snapped out of my shock and asked, What are you doing?" But he didn't say a word. Without answering, he suddenly turned and bolted down the aisle, disappearing around the corner. I hesitated for a second, adrenaline rushing through me, before cautiously following to see where he went. But by the time I reached the end of the aisle, he was already gone. Seconds later, I heard shouting coming from a few aisles over, panicked voices and the sound of someone running. My heart was pounding now. I hurried over and saw one of my coworkers standing there, looking shaken, her phone in her hand. "Call the police!" she exclaimed to another employee nearby. I approached, still trying to make sense of everything. "What's going on?" I asked her. She explained that the guy I'd just seen hiding in my aisle had actually been in the store earlier that evening. Apparently, he tried to steal something near the front entrance, and when an employee confronted him, he'd assaulted them and fled. That's why the police had been there earlier. They were looking for him. Everyone thought he'd left the building, but I guess he never did. He had been hiding inside the store the entire time, in my aisle. The moment she told me that, a chill ran down my spine. He had been hidden just a few feet away from me, crouched behind the rice bags, watching, waiting. The police were called again immediately. No one knew exactly where the guy had gone after that last commotion, but the last anyone saw him, he was running toward the back of the store. The officers arrived quickly and began searching the entire building, aisle by aisle, checking every possible hiding spot. Took them about 15 minutes, but eventually, they found him. He was tucked away in the back storage room, not even a particularly good hiding place, which made the whole thing even stranger. Looking back now, I still don't know who that guy was or what he was really planning. But I'm grateful he didn't do anything to me while I was in that aisle. Could have gone so much worse. I still work at that supermarket, but I'll tell you this. I'm a lot more cautious now, especially on those quiet late-night shifts. Before we proceed, let us know in the comments where you're from. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We want you to be a part of our small community. Let's continue. This is a true and unsettling experience that happened to me just this past May. It was a Saturday, a weekend thankfully, and I had the whole day off work. With a long to-do list of errands piling up, I figured I'd get an early start and knock everything out before the stores got busy. I live in a suburban area where pretty much everything I need is within a short drive. Clothing stores, grocery stores, big retail chains, you name it. The furthest I'd have to go between stores was only a few miles. I planned to hit up about 4 different places around town, saving the grocery store for last so my food wouldn't sit in the car too long. My first stop that morning was a Walmart I didn't usually go to. In fact, I hadn't been to that particular location in over a month. But they had a few items I needed, so I figured why not. It was around 9 a.m. when I pulled into the parking lot. The store was pretty quiet, which honestly I didn't mind. Fewer people meant quicker shopping. I made my way inside, grabbed a cart, and headed to the electronics section to check out a few things. That's when I noticed him. There was a man standing nearby, sunglasses on, even though we were indoors, and a plain black baseball cap pulled low over his face. No logos, no markings, just plain, dark clothing. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I realized he was staring at me. Not casually, not a passing glance. It was the kind of stare that lingers, uncomfortable and deliberate. We were the only 2 people in that section, and the longer his eyes stayed fixed on me, the more uneasy I felt. I quickly moved to another area of the store, brushing it off. Maybe he was just zoning out or looking past me. But when I went up to the self-checkout later, I saw him again. This time he wasn't staring, but he was there, standing several feet away, not shopping, not paying for anything, just there. Still, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I checked out my items, left the store, and walked to my car. I didn't bother looking over my shoulder, convinced that the guy was still inside. After loading up my car, I headed to my next stop, a clothing store just 5 minutes down the road. I parked, went inside, and started browsing, trying to shake off that uncomfortable feeling from earlier. But then, I saw him again. Same sunglasses, same hat, same plain dark clothes, this time, walking casually through the store, not looking at me, but definitely there. At first, I tried to convince myself it was all just a weird coincidence. Maybe he just happened to have errands in the same places as me. But a sinking feeling settled in my chest. I spent about 15 or 20 minutes in that store, always keeping an eye out, and thankfully he didn't approach me. But when I left and walked back to my car, that uneasy feeling returned full force. As I headed to my car, I noticed him again, walking behind me. Not right behind, but close enough that I couldn't pretend it was nothing. The parking lot at this store was smaller and quieter than the Walmart's, making it obvious that he was there, following at a distance. I quickly got in my car, locked the doors, and looked around. I spotted him walking to his own vehicle, parked a few spaces away. I kept my eyes on him as I pulled out, determined to make sure he didn't follow me this time. To my relief, he stayed parked as I drove off. My heart rate slowly returned to normal. I went to another store after that and didn't see him anywhere. For a moment, I thought it was finally over. The last stop on my list was the grocery store. It wasn't a huge supermarket, more of a smaller neighborhood place with a compact parking lot. I pulled in, parked, and went inside, completely forgetting about the man. I finished my shopping without a single issue. No strange encounters. No creepy stares. I'd almost convinced myself that I'd just been overthinking everything earlier. But as soon as I stepped out of the store and back into the parking lot, my heart sank. There he was, sitting in his car, parked by himself, no other vehicles around him, just watching. I froze for a second. The lot was quiet, making it painfully obvious what was happening. He wasn't shopping. He hadn't even gone inside the store. He was just sitting there, waiting. It was impossible to write it off as coincidence anymore. I debated confronting him, but a wave of anxiety stopped me. I wasn't about to escalate things alone in a half-empty parking lot. So I stayed calm, walked to my car, loaded my groceries as quickly as possible, and got inside. But the moment I pulled out of the parking space and left the lot, his car followed. This time, he didn't wait. He pulled out right behind me and stayed glued to my bumper as I drove. Panic set in. Looking back now, I know the smarter thing to do would have been to drive straight to a police station. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking clearly. I just wanted to get home and be done with it. I drove the usual route, keeping an eye on him the whole time. For nearly 10 minutes, he stayed right behind me, never speeding up, never slowing down, just following. When I finally reached my street, I knew I couldn't turn toward my house. I wasn't about to show him exactly where I lived. So I kept driving, passing my place entirely, and took the next turn onto a more familiar, busier road. Thankfully, I knew the area well. A minute later, I saw him make a different turn than me. Finally, I breathed the biggest sigh of relief, but I didn't waste time. At the next opportunity, I looped back toward my neighborhood and made my way home. I pulled into my driveway, grabbed a few grocery bags, and hurried to the door. But just as I was unlocking it, I saw a car approaching. It was him. He was back. He wasn't close yet, but I could see him coming down the street. My car, parked in the driveway, was impossible to miss. Heart pounding, I sprinted inside, locking the door behind me just as he drove past. From the front window, I watched as his car slowed down, creeping by my house at barely a few miles per hour. He didn't stop completely, but he hovered, lingering for what felt like forever before finally veering left and speeding up. I stood there, watching him drive down the street, turning onto another road, disappearing from sight. I cautiously grabbed the rest of my groceries and brought them inside, constantly glancing out the window, half expecting him to come back. Thankfully, he never did. I don't know who that man was, what he wanted, or how long he'd been following me that day. But one thing still terrifies me. He knows where I live, and I pray to God I never see him again. I had a truly unsettling experience recently, and it's been haunting me ever since. This happened just over a week ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. It started out as an ordinary evening. I decided to head to a nearby supermarket, the one I usually go to for my weekly grocery run. It's only a few minutes from where I live, so I shop there pretty regularly, maybe once a week. That night felt like any other. The store wasn't particularly busy, but there were enough people around to make it feel normal. I grabbed a shopping cart and went about my usual routine, weaving through the aisles, picking up what I needed. I was probably in the store for 30 to 45 minutes. Nothing unusual caught my attention. No weird vibes, no strange encounters, nothing. It all felt familiar, routine, forgettable. Once I was done, I checked out at the register, loaded my groceries into the car, and drove home. The whole trip was uneventful, just like any other time I'd gone shopping there. I got home, unpacked my bags, put everything away, and spent the rest of the evening just unwinding. Eventually, I went to bed without giving the trip another thought. It wasn't until the next morning that things started to feel off. When I woke up, I noticed I had a new message on Instagram. At first, I didn't think much of it. But when I opened the app, I saw that it wasn't from someone I followed. It was a message request from an unfamiliar account. The username immediately stood out. It wasn't a name or anything recognizable, just a random jumble of letters and numbers, like someone smashed their keyboard to create it. Curious but cautious, I opened the message. What I saw made my stomach turn. The message contained several photos of me shopping. There I was, pushing my cart through the aisles, checking items on the shelves, all from different angles, all clearly taken without my knowledge. Some of the photos were shaky or blurry, like they'd been snapped quickly from a distance, but there was no mistaking it. It was me in the store just hours earlier. I immediately felt this cold, crawling sensation run down my spine. Why would anyone take pictures of me like that? And how did they find my Instagram? I clicked on the account to see who this was, but the page was completely empty. 0 followers, 0 posts, and they weren't following anyone either. It was a ghost account, practically anonymous. Feeling both creeped out and angry, I replied to the message, demanding to know who they were and why they were taking pictures of me. Within seconds, I saw that they'd read my message, but they didn't respond. The silence on their end only made it worse. My mind was racing with questions. Was this some weird prank? Just a random creep? I tried to convince myself it was harmless, but something about it didn't sit right. What bothered me the most, though, was how they found my Instagram in the first place. My profile isn't completely public, and I definitely didn't remember seeing anyone suspicious following me around the store. I racked my brain, trying to recall if anyone had been staring at me or lingering near me while I shopped, but nothing stood out. I'd been so focused on my errands that I wasn't paying attention to the people around me. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but that anxious feeling never left. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I was in my living room getting ready for bed. That's when I noticed a car parked on the street outside my house. It wasn't parked directly in front of my house, but close enough to make me uneasy, especially because that part of the street doesn't normally have cars parked there, especially that late at night. The car's headlights were off, and I couldn't tell how long it had been sitting there. A knot formed in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone visiting a neighbor, maybe nothing at all. But given the Instagram message earlier, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected. Trying to calm myself down, I closed the curtains, locked the doors, and went to finish getting ready for bed. That's when my phone buzzed. Another Instagram message. My heart practically stopped as I picked up the phone and opened the app. It was the same account, the same random string of letters and numbers. Dread settled over me as I clicked on the message. It was another photo, but this one wasn't taken at the grocery store. It was a picture of my house. It was a wide shot taken from outside across the street, probably from the same car parked out front. My hands were shaking as I bolted back into the living room, yanking the curtain aside just in time to see the car peel away from the curb, speeding down the street and disappearing into the night. I barely slept a wink after that. The next morning, I blocked the Instagram account and debated whether or not to contact the police. But the truth is, nothing else has happened since. It's been over a week now, and so far, no new messages, no cars parked outside. But the whole thing still lingers in the back of my mind. I don't know who that person was, how they found me, or what they wanted, and I hate that feeling of not knowing. All I can do now is stay alert and hope they don't come back. This happened to me almost 2 years ago now, but it still creeps me out whenever I think about it. For some quick background, I'm a woman in my early 20s, and I live in a relatively quiet town. It was a typical evening when I decided to make a late-night run to a nearby supermarket. Not a Walmart, but one of those big chain grocery stores about 10 minutes from my place. It was probably around 10:30 p.m. or so, and the streets were already pretty empty, which isn't unusual for that time. When I arrived, the parking lot was sparsely filled, and inside the store, it was eerily quiet, just a few late-night shoppers milling about. Honestly, I didn't think much of it. I grabbed a cart and started making my way through the aisles, sticking to one side of the store to grab some essentials. About 10 minutes into my shopping, I found myself alone in an aisle, focused on reading the labels of some products. That's when I noticed someone entering the aisle out of the corner of my eye. I didn't pay him much attention at first, but as he walked closer, I glanced up and immediately got an unsettling vibe. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with close-cropped dark brown hair and a lanky build. He was slightly taller than me and had this odd, forced smile on his face. As he approached, he casually greeted me with a simple, "Hey." I replied with a polite but distant hi and returned to looking at the shelf, hoping he'd just move along. But instead, he stayed. "Do you need a ride?" he asked out of nowhere. I froze for a second, confused. Why would a complete stranger inside a grocery store offer me a ride? I politely declined, telling him I was fine, but he didn't back off. Instead, he pressed again. "Are you sure? I could give you a ride if you need one." There was something off about his tone. Too insistent, too casual, like he'd rehearsed this line before. My gut told me to be careful. I firmly told him no, that I didn't need a ride, and turned to walk away down the aisle. But when I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him following me. At first, I tried to convince myself that maybe he was just coincidentally going the same way. But every time I changed aisles, so did he, always keeping a few steps behind me, silent, watching. My heart rate picked up, and that creeping sense of unease quickly turned into full-blown anxiety. Eventually, I stopped abruptly and turned to face him. "Look," I said firmly, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I told you, I don't need a ride. Please, leave me alone." The man held up his hands in mock surrender, his forced grin never leaving his face. All right, he muttered before finally turning and walking away. I stayed put for a moment, watching him disappear around the corner, before exhaling and continuing with my shopping. For the next 15 minutes, I stayed in the grocery section, keeping my eyes peeled, but I didn't see him again. I figured he'd finally gotten the message. Eventually, I headed to the self-checkout, paid for my items, and started making my way toward the exit. But just as I was nearing the automatic doors, I spotted him again. He was approaching the exit as well, but from the opposite direction, coming from outside the store. My stomach twisted. I tried to avoid making direct eye contact, but I couldn't help sneaking a glance at him to see where he was headed. My instincts screamed at me to be cautious. I paused near the exit, bags in hand, pretending to check my receipt. I wasn't about to leave at the same time as him. I wanted him to go first. Thankfully, he walked out the doors, vanishing from sight. I waited a few moments, then made my way outside, scanning the lot. It was quiet again. I couldn't see him anywhere, so I relaxed a little and headed toward my car, which I had parked further down the lot, about halfway back. The lot was dimly lit, and the shadows between the cars made me feel uneasy. As I walked, the sound of hurried footsteps suddenly broke the silence behind me. My skin prickled with fear. I turned quickly, and there he was, that same man, fast walking directly toward me, eyes locked on mine. At first, I tried to rationalize. Maybe his car was parked near mine. But deep down, I knew better. His focus was entirely on me. Without hesitating, I quickened my pace, walking briskly toward my car. I figured I had enough distance between us to get in safely if I moved fast enough. I reached my vehicle, yanked open the back door, and threw my shopping bags inside. But just as I was closing the door, the sound of footsteps behind me turned into a full sprint. My heart dropped. I spun around and saw him running straight toward me. In a panic, I dashed to the driver's side, yanked the door open, and jumped inside, slamming it shut and locking the doors just as he reached me. He immediately grabbed the handle, trying to open the door, his expression now entirely different, colder, determined. When the door wouldn't budge, he started knocking aggressively on my window, his face inches from mine. I didn't wait to see what he'd try next. I shoved the keys into the ignition, started the car, and hit the gas. As I sped off, I could still hear the muffled sound of him pounding on the glass. He even chased my car for a few steps before giving up as I pulled away. Thankfully, I made it out of the parking lot without him following me in a vehicle. But the whole experience shook me to my core. I never went back to that store again after that night. The man gave me a bad feeling from the very start. And to this day, I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't been quick enough to lock my doors. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone, especially women, it's this. If you have to shop late at night, always be hyper-aware of your surroundings. Trust your instincts. They might just save your life. A few months ago, I had a terrifying experience at my local supermarket. One I still think about every time I shop late at night. There's a big retail store just a few kilometers from my house. It's the most convenient place for me to grab essentials, especially since it stays open until 11 p.m. every night. One evening, around 10:30 p.m., I realized I had completely run out of toothpaste. I had already been putting off replacing it for a few days, and this time I decided to just get it over with instead of waiting until morning. I quickly got in my car and drove over. As expected, the parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in. The store was about 20 minutes from closing, so I knew I'd have to move fast. Inside, the place was eerily quiet. Not unusual for that hour, but still, it always feels a little strange when the store is that empty. I made my way to the right side of the building, where I figured the toothpaste aisle would be. Sure enough, I found it pretty quickly. I scanned the shelves for the brand I liked and grabbed it. Nobody else was around. It was just me and the sound of distant music playing over the store's speakers. As I headed toward the checkouts, I passed by another aisle, and that's when something strange caught my eye. I paused. There was a man crouched on the ground, moving products around on the bottom shelf. But he wasn't shopping. He was shifting items aside, creating an open space behind the remaining products. Then he started climbing onto the lowest shelf, like he was trying to hide behind the other items. I stood there for a moment, watching him, confused and unsettled. As he slid further into the shelf space, he noticed me watching him and abruptly stopped. Our eyes met for a brief second. I quickly turned away and walked toward the checkout, trying to brush it off. But I'd only gone a short distance before I heard footsteps behind me. When I glanced back, I saw him emerging from the aisle, now walking in my direction. That creeping feeling of dread hit me immediately. Instead of continuing toward the register, I took a sharp turn into a random aisle, hoping to lose him or at least confirm if he was really following me. I weaved through the seasonal merchandise section, turning quickly into another aisle. I was moving fast, but trying not to make it obvious. Every time I changed aisles, I looked around to see if he was still behind me, but I didn't catch sight of him again right away. I wasn't sure if I'd lost him or if he was simply staying out of view. Eventually, I found myself deep in the sporting goods section, far from the front of the store. I stopped there, feeling like maybe I'd finally shaken him off. The aisle was empty. I looked left and right. Nothing. I stayed put, thinking I'd linger for a few minutes until it was closer to closing time, hoping that by then the man would have either left or gone back to wherever he was hiding. I pretended to browse some of the exercise equipment, just killing time. Then I heard footsteps again, this time from the main walkway that crossed the end of my aisle. I tensed up, waiting to see who it was. As they came into view, I sighed with relief. It was just another customer, not the man from before. The customer walked past me, casually making his way down the aisle and continuing on without stopping. I turned my attention back to the shelf, getting a little too comfortable. I was focused on some workout gear when I suddenly heard a sharp noise behind me. Spinning around, I saw him, the same man from earlier, now walking slowly toward me, holding a baseball bat. He must have grabbed it right off the shelf nearby. His grip was tight, and his steps were slow, steady, like he was savoring the moment. Panic surged through me, but before I could react, I heard a voice from behind him. "What are you doing, man?" It was the other customer, the one who had passed me earlier. His sudden interruption startled the man with the bat, who immediately turned and charged at him instead. The customer bolted, sprinting away as fast as he could. The man with the bat chased after him, leaving me frozen for a second before I snapped back to reality. I took off after them, keeping a safe distance, and frantically pulled out my phone to call the police. I wasn't about to let the guy with the bat catch that customer, especially since that stranger had unintentionally saved me. As the chase continued, an employee caught sight of all the commotion and shouted at us to stop. Maybe they thought it was some kind of prank or a staged video, but this was very, very real. Thankfully, the customer was fast. He managed to put enough distance between himself and the man with the bat. The guy eventually gave up the chase and, in frustration, swung the bat at nearby shelves instead, knocking over some products. I made my way to the front of the store, urgently warning every employee I could find along the way about what was happening. The police arrived within minutes. They quickly spread out, searching the store, and eventually found the man hiding again, this time crouched in a different aisle, still gripping the bat. Fortunately, they were able to get him to surrender without any further incident. The whole experience rattled me so badly that I avoided going back to that store for quite a while. I couldn't stop replaying what happened, how easily things could have gone differently if that customer hadn't shown up when he did. Recently, I've been back a few times, always in the daytime, always more alert. But I'll never forget that night, and I'll always wonder what would have happened if I'd been truly alone in that store. Several months ago, I had one of the strangest and honestly creepiest experiences I've ever had while shopping. My name's Alex, and this happened nearly a year ago at a local Walmart near my place here in Florida. It was around 9 p.m., and I wasn't planning on being there long. I only needed to grab one or two things for my garden, and I figured I'd be in and out quickly. Little did I know how weird that night was about to get. When I arrived, I ended up parking toward the back of the lot. It wasn't that full, but I usually like to park where there's a bit more space. The night air was quiet, the parking lot mostly still, except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. As I walked toward the entrance, I noticed something odd. There was a man standing, perched, on top of one of the vending machines outside the store. You know those bulky machines that sit off to the side of the entrance? It was probably about 20 feet away from the front doors. I slowed down, watching in disbelief as the guy started jumping up and down on top of the machine. It wasn't some prank. At least it didn't seem like it. There wasn't anyone nearby filming or laughing. No crowd, no setup. Just this random guy bouncing on top of a vending machine like it was the most normal thing in the world. He was wearing a big blue t-shirt, baggy jean shorts, and a backwards cap. His whole appearance screamed chaotic energy. As I got closer to the entrance, I paused for a moment. Another shopper was walking out of the store at the same time and noticed the guy too. The shopper called out, telling him to get down, but the man just ignored him. In fact, he started jumping even more aggressively, practically daring anyone to say something. At that point, I just shook my head and thought to myself, classic Walmart. I went inside, still amused but ready to get my errands done. My main goal was to grab a couple of things for my garden, which were located on the far right side of the store. I headed that way, navigating through the mostly empty aisles. It was quiet, not a lot of late-night shoppers and even fewer employees around. Once I found the gardening aisle, I took my time looking through the shelves. There were a few different items to choose from, and I wasn't entirely sure what I needed. I was there for maybe 5 minutes, comparing products, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and froze for a moment. It was him, the same guy from outside, the vending machine guy. He walked toward me with this weird familiarity, like he knew me, like we were friends or something. But I'd never seen this guy in my life. Trying to play it cool, I nodded and greeted him. "Hey, how's it going?" Instead of small talk, the man immediately asked if I could spare him some money. It only took a second for me to realize he was drunk. His words were slurred, his eyes unfocused, and his steps unsteady as he stumbled closer. I politely told him no, hoping that would be the end of it, and turned to walk away. But just as I did, I felt a hand grab my shoulder, stopping me in place. I spun around, and he was right there, way too close for comfort. I told him firmly to leave me alone, pointing out that he was clearly drunk and suggesting he leave the store before someone called the cops on him. His expression changed instantly. The friendly, sloppy demeanor faded, replaced with irritation, maybe even anger. "How dare you talk to me like that?" he snapped. Before I could respond, he shoved me. Not hard, but enough to get his message across. It wasn't much, but I could tell things were escalating fast. For a moment, I considered pushing back or standing my ground, but I stopped myself. It wasn't worth getting into a fight with this guy, especially in the middle of Walmart. Nearby, there was an abandoned shopping cart sitting halfway between the aisle I was in and the next one. I wasn't sure if a customer had left it there or if an employee had been using it. The man stomped over to the cart and, without warning, flipped it over with both hands. The crash of metal and items hitting the floor echoed down the aisle. That was my cue to leave. I turned and walked away, fast, weaving toward the back end of the store. The man tried to follow, but in his drunken state, there was no way he could keep up with me. After several minutes, I doubled back to the gardening section, cautiously checking to see if he was still lurking nearby. Thankfully, he was gone. I grabbed the last few things I needed and headed to the self-checkout area, ready to get out of there as quickly as possible. But just when I thought the weirdness was over, there he was again. This time, he had climbed on top of one of the checkout conveyor belts, standing there yelling obscenities at the top of his lungs. Several employees stood nearby, trying to talk him down, but the man wasn't listening to anyone. His behavior was erratic, his words slurred, and his shouting only getting louder. It was clear that someone had already called the police. I wasn't sticking around to see how it ended. I paid for my stuff, kept my head down, and left the store. That was, without a doubt, the strangest trip to Walmart I've ever had. I still don't know what was going through that guy's mind, whether he was drunk, high, or just completely unhinged. I only hope he didn't hurt anyone that night, but I also hope I never run into him again. A couple of years ago, I used to work at a Walmart doing overnight shifts. It wasn't a bad gig. mostly stocking shelves and organizing different sections of the store while it was quiet. The shifts usually started around 9 p.m., which meant for the first 2 hours, the store was still open to customers. But honestly, even when it was open that late, the place was pretty dead. There were quite a few of us working the overnight shift, especially considering how massive the store was. We each had our sections, and for the most part, it was an easy, uneventful job. But one particular night, things got weird. That night, I had been assigned to the pets and supplies aisle, tucked away near the back of the store. Earlier in the evening, I had been working in that general area, but not that specific aisle. By the time I made my way over there, it was around 11:30 p.m. The store had officially closed at 11 sharp, so technically, no customers were supposed to be inside anymore. As usual, I put in my headphones and listened to music while I worked. It helped pass the time, especially during those quiet, late-night hours. I was mid-task, restocking shelves with dog food and cat litter, when something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. It looked like someone walking past the end of the aisle. I quickly glanced over, but whoever it was had already disappeared. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just one of my coworkers. It wasn't uncommon for them to pass by without saying anything. I went back to work, brushing the thought aside. But a few minutes later, I noticed it again. At the far end of the aisle, someone appeared, this time standing still, watching. I turned to get a better look, expecting to recognize one of my coworkers, but I didn't. It wasn't anyone I'd seen before. It was just some random guy, someone who definitely didn't belong there after closing. Before I could react, the man casually slipped out of view, disappearing behind the next aisle. Instantly uneasy, I pulled out my headphones and grabbed my walkie-talkie. Radioing in to let the others know I thought someone was inside the store who shouldn't be. After making the call, I tried to stay focused on my work. The next hour or so passed without incident, but that uneasy feeling never left. Eventually, I had to head to the back room, a large storage area where we kept excess stock and supplies. It's a pretty big space, but at that time of night, it's usually empty, especially since most employees stay out on the sales floor. As I walked back there, my stomach dropped. I spotted him again. The same man, crouched behind a stack of boxes near the shelving units, partially hidden, watching. I didn't stop walking, didn't stare at him, didn't even flinch. I acted like I hadn't seen him at all, but my mind was racing. I debated what to do. He was only about 30 feet away, hidden but clearly keeping an eye on me. My instincts told me to get the hell out of there. I changed direction and walked back the way I came, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Even with my headphones still in, I could hear faint noises behind me, movement, footsteps. I picked up my pace, practically running for the exit that led back to the sales floor. The footsteps behind me sped up too. I reached the door, pushed it open, and slipped through just in time. When I turned back, the man didn't follow me out, but I wasn't sticking around to see if he would. I made a beeline for electronics, where I knew Al, one of the overnight workers, would be. I found him right away and told him everything. The man in the aisle, the hiding, the footsteps. Al was skeptical at first, but agreed to come with me to check it out. We cautiously made our way back to the storage area. As we opened the door, another noise echoed through the space. It was the sound of another door opening, one of the exit doors in the back of the store that led outside. Those doors were rarely used, but they existed for emergency purposes and deliveries. We moved further inside, just in time to see the man slipping out one of those doors, the metal swinging shut behind him. And then he was gone. I never saw him again. To this day, I don't know how he managed to get inside. My only guess is he came in before closing and hid somewhere, waiting until the store was empty. But what creeps me out the most is wondering what his intentions were. Why he was hiding in the back, why he followed me, what would have happened if I hadn't noticed him. Thankfully, I didn't stay at that job much longer after that night. But I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, and wondering just how long he'd been there before I saw him. Just last night, I had one of the strangest experiences I've ever encountered, and honestly, it still gives me chills thinking about it. I live alone in a small apartment not far from a nearby supermarket, the kind that stays open late, which is usually convenient for someone like me who tends to procrastinate on errands. It all started because I needed to pick up some replacement Halloween lights for my apartment balcony. It wasn't too late in the evening, but definitely past the usual busy hours. The store still had about an hour left before closing, so I figured I had enough time to make the quick trip. Before leaving, though, I hesitated. Something in the back of my mind made me second-guess whether I should go out that late. Just to be sure it was even worth the trip, I tested the old Halloween lights one last time, hoping they'd magically work. No luck, they were still dead. Reluctantly, I grabbed my keys and headed out. It's worth mentioning that the area I live in isn't exactly known for being safe. Over the years, I've seen my fair share of sketchy incidents. Fights, weirdos wandering around, even a robbery or two. But what happened that night easily tops all of that. As I drove down the dimly lit main road toward the supermarket, I noticed a sudden rush of flashing lights in my rearview mirror. A convoy of police cars and fire trucks came speeding past me, sirens blaring. They were moving so fast, it was clear something serious was going down. By the time I pulled into the supermarket parking lot, the place was swarming with law enforcement. I counted at least 10 police vehicles scattered around, their red and blue lights painting the whole area in a surreal glow. People were pouring out of the store, looking shaken and panicked. Curious and more than a little uneasy, I flagged down one of the store employees lingering near the exit and asked what happened. His face was pale as he explained. Just minutes before I arrived, some unhinged guy had broken into a construction site a few blocks down the road. Apparently, he managed to hotwire a massive excavator, one of those huge industrial digging machines, and drove it straight through several utility poles and even crashed into a storage unit, completely flattening it. But it didn't stop there. The guy somehow managed to steer the excavator all the way to the supermarket. Once he got there, he rammed the machine right into the automotive department on the side of the building, causing absolute chaos. After the excavator stalled out, he climbed down, stormed into the store, and, believe it or not, pulled out a machete, threatening random customers. The employee told me it took nearly 7 police officers to finally subdue him. The entire confrontation unfolded right near the front of the store, ironically close to both the Halloween display and the automotive section he crashed into. The whole situation sent a shiver down my spine, especially when I realized how narrowly I avoided being there in the middle of all that madness. If I hadn't stopped to test those faulty Halloween lights one last time, who knows what I might have walked into. Needless to say, I've been to that supermarket dozens of times since moving into this apartment complex. It's barely a minute's drive away, just out of the parking lot, down the main road, and you're there. But after last night, I'm definitely going to think twice before running late-night errands again. This happened a little over a year ago, but I still think about it more often than I'd like to admit. It was one of those evenings where the hours slipped by, and before I realized it, it was already around 8 or 9 p.m. I wasn't paying much attention to the clock, just winding down after a long day, when I noticed that my kitchen cabinets and fridge were practically empty. I debated whether I should just wait until morning to go grocery shopping. But then I remembered my schedule for the next day was packed. Errands, work calls, there wouldn't be any time. Figuring it wouldn't take long anyway, I decided to suck it up and go shopping that night. The supermarket wasn't far at all. I live in a fairly large apartment complex with multiple buildings clustered around a big, open parking lot. After grabbing my keys and wallet, I made my way to my car and drove the short 2-minute stretch down to the nearby supermarket. It was surprisingly quiet for that time of night. The parking lot wasn't empty, but far from full, and the whole place had this stillness to it. Inside, things were calm. A few scattered shoppers wandered the aisles, but it was far from busy. I grabbed a cart and slowly made my way around, mentally trying to piece together everything I needed. I never remember to make a proper shopping list, which always turns my grocery trips into a scavenger hunt. After maybe 25 or 30 minutes, I'd finally gathered everything. Not much, probably around 10 items, and headed up to the self-checkout lanes. I paid, bagged my groceries, and made my way back to the car. The whole time I was inside the store, nothing seemed unusual. It all felt like a typical late evening grocery run until I left. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a car following behind me. First, I thought nothing of it. It's a small city, lots of people shop at that supermarket. Chances are they lived nearby, too. But as I turned into my apartment complex, I realized the same car followed me in. Even then, I wasn't entirely alarmed. Maybe they were a neighbor I just hadn't noticed before. It was a small, older-looking sedan, the kind you'd see a dozen of in the lot. I couldn't tell the make or model. I'm no car person, but it was nothing that stood out, other than how closely they parked near me, just across the lot facing another building. I shrugged it off and grabbed my 3 grocery bags from the car, heading toward my building. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, steady, following mine. I glanced back and saw the man who'd been driving the other car. At first, I assumed he lived in the complex, probably heading to a different building. But no, he was walking straight toward the same entrance as me. His pace quickened as I got closer to the side door, the one next to the stairwell. I always used to avoid walking down the long hallway or waiting for the slow, creaky elevator. It struck me as odd that he was using the side door. Most people just use the main entrance. He stayed only about 5 feet behind me, close enough to make me uncomfortable but not enough to say anything outright. The man had his hood up over his head, wearing a dark gray sweatshirt and shorts, and carrying a single grocery bag from the same supermarket I'd been at. I didn't recognize him, but to be fair, I don't really know most of my neighbors. Against my better judgment, I held the door open for him. I was hoping, praying, even that he'd head down the first-floor hallway while I took the stairs up to my apartment on the second floor. But as I climbed the steps, I heard his footsteps right behind me, following every move. The building has 4 floors, and when I reached mine, I turned down the hallway toward my apartment. He did the exact same thing. My unease was growing with every step, but I kept telling myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe he lived across the hall or was visiting someone. My apartment was the second door on the left, with another door directly opposite on the other side of the hall. As I approached mine, I took out my keys, glancing over my shoulder. The man stopped at the door across from mine and pulled out his phone. That eased my nerves a bit. Maybe he was my neighbor's friend or relative. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and shut it behind me. The first thing I did was set my grocery bags on the kitchen counter. But before I could even take a breath, I heard my front door creak open. I turned, frozen in disbelief, as the man from the hallway casually stepped into my apartment. I didn't even have time to process it. Pure instinct took over. I bolted for the bathroom, the nearest room, slammed the door shut, and locked it. From the other side of the door, I could hear him moving around. I yelled that I was calling the police, demanded that he leave, but he said nothing. For what felt like an eternity, I heard him lingering by the front door. Then the unmistakable sound of him locking it from the inside echoed through the apartment. My heart raced as his footsteps drifted toward the kitchen, then the living room. I stayed frozen in the bathroom, terrified he'd try to break in or worse, but he never approached the door. Instead, I listened as he wandered around, eventually heading into my bedroom. The second I heard him cross that threshold, I made my move. I quietly cracked the bathroom door, sprinted to the front door, unlocked it, and bolted into the hallway. I didn't look back. I flew down the stairs, heart pounding, until I reached the lobby. For some reason, that space, with its mailroom, chairs, and tables, felt safe enough to catch my breath. I called the police from there and waited, eyes locked on the front entrance, scanning for any sign of the man. Thankfully, I never saw him again. The officers arrived about 10 minutes later. I rushed to meet them and gave them my unit number. They headed upstairs while I stayed in the lobby, shaking but relieved help had come. Unfortunately, by the time they searched my apartment, the man was long gone. He'd ransacked the place, stealing several of my belongings, but thankfully, I was unharmed. I gave my statement, filled out a report, and spent the rest of the night rattled, double-checking locks and peeking out the window every few minutes. To this day, they never caught him. I never saw him again, and I've never been back to that supermarket since. I can only assume he spotted me shopping and, for reasons I'll never understand, decided to follow me home. Back when I was 17, I landed my very first job, working as a cashier at a local supermarket. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but I was excited to finally be earning my own money. The work wasn't glamorous, but at that age, just having a paycheck made it worth it. I'd been there for about a month when this unsettling incident happened. I was scheduled for a closing shift that night, which meant I'd be working until 9:30 p.m., the latest they allowed minors like me to stay. The evening had been uneventful for the most part, and by the final hour, the store had quieted down, with only a trickle of customers left. That's when a woman walked up to my register. She was alone, purchasing nothing but a bottle of water. She looked to be somewhere around her early 40s. As she approached, she smiled and greeted me. I greeted her back politely and asked how her night was going. That's when things started to feel off. She called me cute, her tone dripping with flirtation that immediately made me uncomfortable. I was caught off guard. This woman was easily twice my age. At first, I thought maybe she was just overly friendly, but then she asked me what I was doing after work. Trying to keep it casual, I told her I planned on going home and getting some sleep. I had school in the morning. She laughed, told me to loosen up, and suggested we hang out instead. Her persistence made my skin crawl. I awkwardly declined again, but she wasn't letting it go. She even asked for my phone number. Panicking slightly, I told her I didn't have a phone. Obviously not true, but I didn't know how else to shut down the conversation. Finally, she smiled and told me, "I'll see you later," before walking off. Relieved, I finished the rest of my shift without incident. Only a few more customers came through my line, and by 9:30, I was clocked out and heading to the parking lot. Back then, I used one of my parents' old cars to get around, nothing fancy, but it got me to work and school. As I walked through the quiet, mostly empty parking lot toward my car, I noticed a vehicle idling just a few spaces away from mine. As I got closer, my stomach twisted. The same woman from earlier was sitting in the passenger seat. A man I didn't recognize was behind the wheel. Something about the situation felt wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were waiting for me. Worried that they might follow me, I made a snap decision. I wouldn't get in my car just yet. I casually turned around, pretending I forgot something, and started walking back toward the store. That's when I heard the low hum of an engine creeping up behind me. I turned my head and saw their car approaching, slowing as it pulled alongside me. The window rolled down, and the woman leaned out with that same unsettling smile. "Need a ride?" she asked sweetly, as if this was all perfectly normal. I shook my head, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, thanks." She persisted, saying they could take me wherever I needed to go, no trouble at all. I didn't reply. I just turned and bolted toward the store, my heart pounding in my chest. Thankfully, I made it inside and hovered just beyond the automatic doors, watching them through the glass. Their car drifted off toward the far end of the lot, disappearing for a moment. I exhaled, but then I spotted them again. They circled back around to the front of the store, driving slowly past where I stood. I stayed inside, watching anxiously as they cruised the lot, making lazy loops as if they were waiting me out. 5-10 minutes passed. I debated calling my parents to come pick me up, afraid that if I tried to leave, they'd follow me again. Finally, after what felt like forever, their car pulled out of the lot and disappeared down the street. I waited several more minutes, scanning the lot to make sure they didn't come back. When I was confident the coast was clear, I hurried out to my car, locked the doors, and drove home without incident. I kept working at that supermarket for another 2 months after that night. In that time, I never saw the woman or the man again. And honestly, I'm grateful I didn't. But to this day, I still wonder what their real intentions were, and what might have happened if I hadn't trusted my instincts that night.